The phone on my kitchen island was on speaker when my sister shattered my reality. I was dusting flour off my apron, smiling at my two kids, Isla and Graham, who were drawing a family portrait with crayons. The house smelled like warm vanilla and cinnamon. Then Curran's voice cut through the peaceful afternoon air. "Marin, you have to understand. Your kids are sweet, but I cannot have them tainting the image of Fallon's party. They are just too blue-collar for the guests I am inviting." I froze. The room seemed to spin. Blue-collar. Tainting the image. My own sister was banning my 7-year-old and 5-year-old from their cousin's 10th birthday because we were not rich enough, fancy enough, or elite enough for her networking event. She told me my kids would embarrass her in front of the tech executives and venture capitalists she was trying to impress. My daughter Isla dropped her red crayon. It hit the wooden table with a sharp click. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes welling with tears, and whispered, "Mommy, does blue-collar mean we are dirty?" That broke me. It shattered 34 years of playing the peacekeeper. My family always treated me like a lesser being because I ran a small bakery while Corinne married a flashy agency owner. They pushed me down, humiliated me, and I took it to keep the peace. But looking at my crying daughter, something dark and fiercely protective snapped awake inside my chest. Corinne had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that my quiet, flannel-wearing husband, Callum, was the exact venture capitalist her husband was desperately begging for a $25 million bailout. She just started a war she could never win. How did a birthday party invitation lead to the total financial ruin of a toxic golden child? Let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. "Corinne, what did you just say?" I asked, my voice trembling. I wiped my flour-covered hands on a towel, trying to grip the fabric to ground myself. "Don't make this difficult, Marin," Corinne sighed. It was that heavy, theatrical sigh she always used when she felt she was dealing with someone intellectually inferior. "Fallon's 10th birthday gala is costing us $50,000. It is not just a party with clowns and cheap balloons. It is a curated networking event. We have invited the children of serious investors, real estate moguls, and the mayor's inner circle. The theme is Parisian elegance. The kids are going to be conversing in French and wearing designer couture. I mean, look at your kids. They are wonderful, sure, but they do not fit the aesthetic. They wear handmade shirts. You bake cakes for a living. You guys give off a very heavy blue-collar vibe, and that lowers the value of the entire event." I stared at the phone. The words felt like physical slaps. "They're your niece and nephew. They're 7 and 5 years old. It is a birthday party, Corinne, not a corporate merger." "That is exactly the small-minded mentality that keeps you stuck in that little kitchen of yours," she snapped back. "Preston and I are building an empire. We cannot afford to have our brand diluted. Isla and Graham are too loud, too unpolished. They will stick out like sore thumbs. I am actually doing you a favor. They would feel incredibly out of place among people of our caliber. It is better for everyone if you just stay home." I looked at my children. Graham was too young to fully grasp the cruelty pouring out of the speaker, but Isla was frozen. Her lower lip quivered. She slowly pulled her arms inward, wrapping them around her small body as if trying to shrink, trying to hide the little denim overalls I had bought her for school. "You are uninviting your own family because you think we are not shiny enough for your rich friends," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I am protecting my investments," Corinne corrected coldly. "I knew you would take this personally and get emotional. You always do. Just send a gift in the mail. Something tasteful, please. Nothing handmade." "I have to go. My event planner is calling on the other line." The line went dead. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a long moment, the flour on my hands turning sticky as my palms began to sweat. Anger, pure and unfiltered, roared in my ears. I had spent my entire life bending backward for this family. I had swallowed every insult, every backhanded compliment, every eye roll. But this was different. They were coming for my kids. "Mommy?" Isla's voice was barely a squeak. I dropped to my knees right there on the kitchen floor and pulled her into my arms. Graham, sensing the shift in the air, abandoned his drawing and waddled over to hug my neck. No, baby, I whispered fiercely into Isla's hair, blinking back my own tears. Blue collar does not mean dirty. It means we work hard. It means we are real. You are perfect. Both of you are perfect. But Aunt Corinne said we ruin her image, Isla sniffled, wiping her nose on my apron. She said we don't belong. Aunt Corinne is wrong, I said, pulling back to look my daughter right in the eyes. I made sure my voice was steady, projecting a strength I was only just beginning to feel. She is entirely wrong. We do not want to go to a party where people only care about fancy clothes. We are going to have our own fun. I promise you that. I held them tight for a long time, rocking them on the linoleum floor. The smell of the vanilla cakes cooling on the rack suddenly felt sickeningly sweet. I looked up at the phone resting on the counter. Corinne thought she had just neatly trimmed an ugly branch off her family tree to make it look better for her wealthy friends. She thought she had won. But as I held my children, wiping the tears from their innocent faces, a cold, calculating resolve settled over my heart. She wanted to talk about caliber? She wanted to talk about net worth and networking? Fine. We could play that game. But she was about to learn a terrifying lesson about who really held the cards. What would she do when she realized the blue-collar sister she just threw away was the only thing standing between her and total ruin? After getting the kids settled in the living room with a movie and a plate of fresh cookies, I returned to the kitchen to clean up. The physical act of scrubbing the counters usually calmed me down, but today, every aggressive swipe of the sponge just fueled the fire burning in my chest. I scrubbed hard, my mind drifting into the dark, dusty corners of my memory. Being the invisible child in my family was not a new role, it was a lifelong sentence. I called it my museum of pain, a collection of memories where I was always the sacrifice for Corinne's comfort. My parents had always made it clear, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that Corinne was the golden child. She was the pretty one, the ambitious one, the one destined for greatness. I was just Marin. The quiet one. The one who liked baking and reading and didn't care about designer labels. I scrubbed a stubborn patch of dry dough, remembering my junior year of college. I had worked 3 part-time jobs to save up enough money to buy a used, beat-up Honda Civic. It meant freedom. It meant I did not have to take the bus at midnight after my shifts. But a week after I bought it, Corinne had a massive meltdown. She had failed 2 of her business classes and claimed she was suffering from severe burnout. My parents decided she desperately needed a healing trip to Europe to find herself. But they were short on cash. I will never forget sitting at the dining table while my mother looked at me with pleading, manipulative eyes. Marin, you know how fragile your sister is. She needs this trip for her mental health. You don't really need a car, do you? The campus bus is fine. We need you to sell it so we can afford her tickets. I had cried. I had argued. But in the end, the guilt-tripping was too much. I sold my hard-earned car. Corinne went to Paris, posted hundreds of glamorous photos, and came back wearing a designer coat she bought with the leftover money. She never even thanked me. Then came the opening day of my bakery. I had spent 2 years perfecting my recipes, securing a tiny loan, and scrubbing the floors of a run-down storefront until my knees bled. I invited the whole family. I was so proud. But on the morning of the grand opening, Corinne called to cancel. Marin, I just cannot make it, she had said, sounding bored. Preston bought me this stunning silk dress, and you know how bakeries are. The smell of butter and frying oil gets trapped in the fabric. It takes 3 dry cleanings to get it out. Plus, Preston's business partners are having a brunch, and we really need to show face. Good luck with the muffins, though. Good luck with the muffins. I threw the sponge into the sink, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. They always looked down on me, but their disdain for my husband, Callum, was even worse. Callum and I met in college. He was quiet, brilliant, and wore the same 3 flannel shirts every week. When I brought him home, Corinne and Preston openly mocked him. Preston, who leased luxury cars he could barely afford and wore flashy Rolex watches, treated Callum like the help. He would ask Callum to fetch him beers at family barbecues or make condescending jokes about Callum's basic jeans. My family thought Callum was a low-level accountant. They thought we were barely scraping by because we lived in a modest, cozy home in the suburbs and drove practical cars. What they did not know, because we never felt the need to brag, was that Callum was a financial predator in the best way possible. He was the managing partner of a massive venture capital firm downtown. While Preston was busy trying to look rich on Instagram, Callum was the guy quietly deciding which tech startups got $50 million in funding. Callum's net worth was something Corinne could not even fathom in her wildest, most materialistic dreams. We just preferred a quiet, normal life. We valued peace over pretense. But peace was no longer an option. I dried my hands on a towel, staring out the window into our backyard. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows over the grass. I had accepted the disrespect directed at me for decades because I thought I was protecting the family bond. I thought if I just absorbed the hits, everyone would be happy. But toxic people do not respect boundaries, they just look for new targets. And Corinne had just targeted the only thing in this world I would burn a city down for, my children. I heard the familiar rumble of Callum's truck pulling into the driveway. It was an older model, reliable and sturdy. The kind of truck Preston would laugh at. A few seconds later, the front door opened and Callum stepped inside, dropping his worn leather briefcase by the door. He walked into the kitchen, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, his hair slightly messy from the wind. He stopped when he saw my face. Callum had a way of reading me that was almost supernatural. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how my day was. He took one look at my red-rimmed eyes, the tense set of my shoulders, and the abandoned cleaning supplies. "Who do I need to destroy?" he asked, his voice low and dead serious. I let out a shaky breath, feeling the tears threaten to spill again. I didn't want to cry, but the relief of having him in my corner was overwhelming. The museum of pain I had carried for so long felt a little lighter just by him standing there. But the anger was still burning hot and bright. "We need to talk about Corinne and Preston," I said, my voice tight. Callum's eyes darkened. He walked over, wrapped his strong arms around me, and pulled me into his chest. He smelled like cedarwood and old books. "Tell me everything," he murmured against my hair. As I stood there in the embrace of my quiet, unassuming husband, I knew the dynamic of my family was about to shift violently. The golden child had pushed the invisible sister too far. And she was about to find out that the man she mocked for wearing flannel held the keys to her entire fake kingdom. Would Callum let this go, or would he unleash the kind of corporate hell Preston could never survive? We sat at the kitchen island. I poured him a cup of coffee, my hands still shaking slightly. I told him everything. I repeated Corinne's words verbatim. I told him about the $50,000 gala, the elite networking, the French-speaking children. And then I told him the part that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Isla heard it, I whispered, staring down at my cold coffee mug. She heard Corinne say they were too blue-collar, too unpolished. Callum. Isla looked at me and asked if blue-collar meant she was dirty. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. I watched Callum's face. He didn't shout. He didn't punch the wall. Callum's rage was never explosive. It was an icy, calculated chill. He slowly reached across the counter and took off his watch, setting it down with a heavy thud. The muscle in his jaw clenched, jumping rhythmically as he ground his teeth. His eyes, usually warm and gentle, went flat and dark. It was the look he had when a rival firm tried to steal a deal from him. It was the look of a wolf realizing a rabbit had just wandered into its den and insulted its cubs. "She said our children would taint her image," Callum repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "She uninvited them to protect her investments," I confirmed, wiping a rogue tear from my cheek. "She thinks we are too poor to be seen with her wealthy friends." Callum stared at the wall for a long, silent moment. Then a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that made my spine tingle. "Marin," he said quietly, reaching out to take my hand. His grip was firm, grounding me. "Do you know what Preston has been doing for the last 3 months?" I shook my head, confused. "Posting pictures of his leased Porsche? Faking a lifestyle." "Besides that," Callum said, pulling his iPad out of his leather briefcase. He tapped the screen a few times and turned it toward me. Preston's media agency is dying. He lost 3 major accounts this year. He is drowning in overhead costs and his creditors are circling. For the last 90 days, Preston has been desperately stalking my firm. My jaw dropped. What? He knows what you do. No, Callum shook his head. He knows the name of the venture capital firm. He knows they are aggressively acquiring struggling media agencies. He has been pitching to my junior partners, practically begging them to buy his agency for $25 million to bail him out. He thinks he is dealing with a faceless corporate board. He has no idea that I am the managing partner. He has no idea that I am the one who has the absolute final veto on every single acquisition over $10 million. I stared at the emails on the screen. There were frantic messages from Preston, promising massive returns, begging for a meeting with the top brass. The irony of it was suffocating. The man who made my husband fetch his beers was currently groveling at my husband's feet without even knowing it. He needs this money to survive, Callum continued, his voice cold and clinical. And Corinne is throwing a $50,000 party while her husband is secretly begging for a lifeline. They are putting on a fake crown while the castle burns. Were you going to approve the buyout? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Callum scoffed softly. I was actually reviewing his file this week. I was considering throwing him a bone for your sake. I was going to restructure his debt, keep him on as a figurehead, and let him save face so your family wouldn't suffer. But now, Callum picked up his iPad. Now, they don't get mercy. I watched as Callum opened his email client. He started typing a message to Zola. Zola was the head of the legal department at Callum's firm. She was a brilliant, ruthless lawyer who treated corporate audits like a blood sport. She didn't just find mistakes, she found sins. What are you doing? I asked, leaning closer. I am triggering a forensic audit, Callum said, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard. When an acquisition is on the table, we have the right to deep dive into every single financial record the target company has. Every receipt, every tax filing, every email, every hidden bank account. Usually, we do a surface check. But a forensic audit? That means my team will tear his entire life apart looking for fraud. And guys like Preston? Guys who care more about looking rich than being honest? They always leave a trail of dirt. He hit send. The email was simple. Zola. Initiate a full forensic audit on Preston's agency. Tear up the floorboards. I want every dirty secret he has on my desk by Sunday night. Callum set the iPad down and looked at me. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a fierce, unwavering devotion. Let them have their Parisian gala, he said softly. Let Corinne wear her designer dress and drink expensive champagne. Let them think they have successfully kept the blue-collar trash out of their elite circle. Because come Monday morning, I am going to remind them exactly who signs the checks in this family. A shiver ran down my arms. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to keep the peace. I did not want to call my parents to smooth things over. I wanted to see the look on Corinne's face when the illusion she sacrificed my children for finally shattered. What do we do until then? I asked. We take our kids out, Callum smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. We show them what a real family looks like. We protect them. And we wait. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The storm was coming, but for once, I was not the one standing out in the rain. I was sitting safe in the shelter, watching the hurricane head straight for my sister's glass house. But as we planned a fun weekend for the kids to distract them, I had no idea just how much rot Zola was going to find under Preston's floorboards. I thought we were just going to cancel a business deal. I didn't realize Callum had just ordered an excavation that would unearth secrets dark enough to send a man to federal prison. What exactly was Preston hiding behind his leased luxury cars and fake Rolexes? Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and a heavy feeling in my stomach. Today was the day of Fallon's 10th birthday gala. I woke up early, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and made the mistake of opening Instagram. Corinne's story was already active. The first video showed a massive, rented mansion with manicured lawns. Huge floral arrangements of imported white roses flanked the entrance. The caption read, setting the stage for my princess. Only the best for the best. The next story showed waiters in crisp white shirts setting up a champagne tower for the parents. She had used a series of hashtags that made my blood boil. Hashtag high society, hashtag elite networking, and then, nestled at the very end, hashtag no blue collar. She actually typed it out. She put it on the internet for everyone to see. It was a subtle, venomous strike aimed directly at me, wrapped in the guise of aesthetic exclusivity. She was proud of excluding us. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the couch. I refused to let her toxic energy infect my home today. All right, team. Callum boomed, walking down the stairs with Graham riding on his shoulders. Callum was wearing his favorite faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. Who is ready to see some sharks? Isla ran out of her bedroom, holding her favorite stuffed penguin. Me? Are we really going to the aquarium, Daddy? We are going to see every single fish in that building, Callum promised, swinging Graham down to the floor. And we are going to eat our weight in blue cotton candy. No fancy clothes required. We piled into the truck and drove downtown. The aquarium was packed with families. It was loud, chaotic, and smelled faintly of chlorine and popcorn. It was the exact opposite of Corinne's Parisian gala. It was real. We spent hours pointing at neon jellyfish, watching the sea turtles glide gracefully through the water, and laughing as Graham tried to roar at the stingrays. We bought overpriced, sticky blue ice cream that melted all over our hands. We took silly selfies in front of the octopus tank, our faces distorted by the curved glass. For a few hours, the heavy weight of Corinne's betrayal lifted. I watched Callum lift Isla up so she could see the top of the coral reef exhibit. They were smiling. We were happy. But trauma has a funny way of sneaking up on you when your guard is down. We were walking through the massive glass tunnel of the shark exhibit. The blue light from the water cast shifting shadows over the concrete floor. That is when Isla stopped dead in her tracks. About 20 feet ahead of us was another family. They were celebrating a birthday. The little girl, probably around Isla's age, was wearing a sparkly silver birthday crown and a pristine white dress. Her parents were taking pictures of her pointing at a massive great white shark. I saw Isla's shoulders tense. Her grip on my hand tightened so hard her little knuckles turned white. She took a step backward, hiding behind my leg. Hey, what's wrong, sweetie? I asked gently, kneeling down to her level. Isla's eyes were locked on the girl in the white dress. Her lower lip began to tremble, and a fat tear rolled down her cheek, leaving a clean streak through the sticky blue ice cream residue on her face. Mommy, she whispered, her voice cracking. We shouldn't be here. Why not, baby? I asked, my heart dropping into my stomach. That girl is having a birthday party, Isla sobbed quietly, trying to make herself as small as possible. Aunt Corinne said we ruin parties. She said we make things look bad because we are not shiny enough. We are blue collar. We are going to make that girl's dress dirty just by being near her. We have to go, Mommy. Please. The sound of the water filtering through the tanks faded away. All I could hear was the broken, terrified voice of my 7-year-old daughter who had internalized the venom of my sister's snobbery. Corinne had not just uninvited her, she had planted a seed of shame deep in my child's soul. Callum handed Graham to me and dropped to his knees right there on the cold, sticky concrete floor of the shark tunnel. Dozens of people were walking past us, but Callum did not care. He took Isla's small hands in his massive ones. Isla, look at me, Callum said. His voice was thick with emotion, fierce and unwavering. Isla sniffled and looked up at her father. You listen to me, and you listen to me very carefully, Callum said, holding her gaze. You are the smartest, kindest, most beautiful girl in this entire city. There is nothing dirty about you. There is nothing wrong with you. Anyone who tells you that you do not belong is a liar. Do you hear me? A liar. But Aunt Corinne is a very sad, very confused person who thinks money makes her important, Callum interrupted gently but firmly. But she is wrong. I swear to you on my life, Isla, I will never let anyone make you feel small again. Not ever. Nobody gets to treat my daughter like she doesn't matter. I will burn their world down first. Isla threw her arms around Callum's neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Callum held her tight, his eyes meeting mine over her back. The look in his eyes was no longer just protective. It was lethal. The initial audit he ordered was meant to be a professional rejection, a way to cut Preston off. But seeing our daughter cry on a concrete floor because she thought her mere presence would ruin someone else's day, that changed everything. This was no longer just business. This was an execution. We stayed at the aquarium until Isla was smiling again, but the drive home was quiet. The fun of the day had a dark undercurrent. When we finally put the exhausted kids to bed, the house settled into a heavy, expectant silence. Callum went straight to his home office and locked the door. He told me Zola was finalizing the preliminary report of the forensic audit. He said he needed to review the numbers. I paced the living room, checking my phone. Corinne was still posting. A video of Fallon cutting a 5-tier cake. A photo of Preston clinking champagne glasses with a tech billionaire, looking smug and triumphant. They were flying high, completely oblivious to the predator circling in the dark water beneath them. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Callum. "Come to the office. Now." I walked down the hall and opened the heavy oak door. Callum was sitting at his massive desk, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of dual monitors. He did not look angry anymore. He looked shocked. "What is it?" I asked, stepping into the room. Callum turned the monitor toward me. It was a massive spreadsheet, filled with red highlights and legal jargon. "I told Zola to look for dirt," Callum said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I expected to find a few late payments. Maybe some exaggerated revenue. I thought he was just a bad businessman playing dress-up." "And?" I prompted, my throat going dry. "Marin," Callum looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Preston is not just a bad businessman. He is a criminal. And he just made the biggest mistake of his pathetic life." What horrible secret had Zola dug out of the financial ruins of Preston's agency, and how was it going to destroy the golden child's perfect Parisian facade? I pulled up a leather chair and sat next to Callum. The screen was filled with rows of financial data, banking logs, and legal summaries. At the top of the document, in bold red letters, Zola had typed, "Confidential. Urgent review required. Evidence of felony fraud." Felony. I breathed, staring at the word. "Callum, what did he do?" Callum rubbed his temples, letting out a long, heavy breath. He clicked open a video call window. Zola's face appeared on the screen. Even at midnight on a Saturday, she looked impeccably sharp, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Evening, Marin," Zola said briskly. "Callum, I assume you have read the executive summary?" "I am reading it now, Zola," Callum said grimly. "Walk us through it. Explain it so Marin understands the scale of what we are dealing with." Zola adjusted her glasses. "Preston's agency has been insolvent for 8 months. He has zero liquidity. To keep up appearances and desperately try to attract buyers, he started cooking the books. He inflated his agency's revenue by 40%. He created fake shell companies, billed them for imaginary marketing services, and listed those fake invoices as accounts receivable. It is a classic Ponzi-adjacent move to make the company look profitable on paper." "He lied about how much money he makes," I translated slowly. "That is bad, but is it federal prison bad?" "If he presented those numbers to investors, yes," Zola replied, her tone icy. "But that is not the worst part, Marin. That is just the appetizer. The main course is how he funded his lifestyle while the company bled out." Callum clicked to the next page of the report. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. 3 months ago, Zola continued, Preston took out a massive margin loan from 3 different boutique banks. We are talking $3 million in total. He used this cash to lease the Porsche, keep paying the mortgage on that ridiculous mansion, and, based on the recent withdrawals, fund a $50,000 birthday party. "Wait," I interrupted, my head spinning. "How does a guy with a failing, broke company get a $3 million loan? Banks don't just hand out cash to dying businesses." "They don't," Callum said, his voice dropping an octave. He pointed a trembling finger at a scanned document on the screen. Unless you have a guarantor. Someone with massive, verified wealth who signs a document promising to pay the bank back if you default. I leaned in, squinting at the scanned PDF. It was a loan agreement. At the bottom, on the guarantor line, was a signature. It was a messy, scrawled signature, but the printed name beneath it was crystal clear: Callum Hayes, Managing Partner, Apex Venture Capital. The air rushed out of my lungs. I felt dizzy. Callum, did you sign that? No, Callum growled, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. I have never seen this document in my life. Preston forged my signature. He used my name, my title, and the reputation of my firm to illegally secure $3 million in loans. He committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. Silence descended on the office. The sheer audacity of it was paralyzing. Preston had mocked my husband for years. He treated him like a peasant. And yet, behind closed doors, he was using Callum's hard-earned reputation to steal millions of dollars just to buy fancy cars and throw elite parties so Corinne could feel superior to me. They paid for that party with stolen money, I whispered, the realization washing over me like a bucket of ice water. Corinne called my kids blue-collar trash. She said we would taint her image. But her entire life, her dresses, her house, the caviar at that party, it was all bought with money her husband stole using my husband's name. Exactly, Zola said from the screen. And, because he used Callum's name, this makes it a direct liability for Apex Venture Capital. Which means we are legally obligated to report this to the authorities immediately. If we don't, we become accomplices. So, what is the play? Callum asked Zola, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was pure, ruthless business now. I have already drafted the report for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, Zola said smoothly. I have also prepared the fraud alerts for the 3 banks he defrauded. And, obviously, the acquisition deal is dead. He will not get the $25 million. When the banks get our fraud alert on Monday morning, they will immediately freeze all of Preston's accounts. Personal and business. His credit cards will decline. His assets will be locked. And the feds will likely knock on his door by Tuesday. Callum nodded slowly. Send the reports, Zola. Trigger the SEC investigation. Burn him to the ground. With pleasure, boss, Zola smirked, and the call disconnected. Callum closed the laptop. The screen went dark, casting the room into shadows. He sat back in his chair and looked at me. The quiet, gentle man I married was still there, but he had armor on now. He crossed the line, Marin, Callum said softly. I could have handled the insults. I could have handled him being a fake. But he stole my name to fund the very same lifestyle they used to humiliate our children. I am not going to protect him. I am going to let the law rip him apart. I walked over and sat on Callum's lap, wrapping my arms around his neck. I rested my forehead against his. Do it, I whispered. I don't care what the family says. I don't care about the fallout. Do it. We sat in the quiet dark for a long time. Corinne had tried to curate a perfect, flawless image for the world. She thought she was untouchable on her pedestal of stolen gold. She thought kicking her invisible sister and innocent niece to the curb was a power move. But she had no idea that the foundation of her entire life was about to evaporate overnight. Monday was going to be a bloodbath. Preston was scheduled to walk into Callum's firm, expecting to sign a $25 million buyout with a faceless board of directors. He was going to walk in with his fake Rolex and his forged confidence. But what happens when the golden child's husband walks into a boardroom and realizes the man he has been mocking for a decade is the executioner waiting to drop the guillotine? Sunday morning dawned quiet and tense. The calm before the hurricane. The SEC reports were filed. The banks were notified. The trap was set, armed, and waiting for Preston to step into it on Monday. Callum spent the morning playing in the backyard with Isla and Graham, building a massive cardboard fort. I watched them from the kitchen window, feeling a fierce, protective warmth in my chest. We were a real family. Our foundation was built on love, not stolen money and fake prestige. But toxic families never let you rest for long. At exactly 1 in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I stared at the screen, my stomach tying itself into a familiar knot. In the ecosystem of a toxic family, when the golden child feels slighted, the parents become the flying monkeys sent out to harass, guilt-trip, and batter the scapegoat into submission. Corinne must have complained that I didn't send a gift or beg for forgiveness for being difficult about the party. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I decided to employ a psychological tactic I had read about on a Reddit support forum, the gray rock method. Be as boring, unreactive, and emotionless as a gray rock. Give them nothing to feed on. I hit accept. Hello, Mom. Marin. Finally. I have been calling you all morning, my mother's voice shrilled through the speaker, dripping with condescension and aggressive disappointment. I am absolutely appalled by your behavior this weekend. Do you have any idea how much stress you caused your sister on the most important day of Fallon's life? I was busy with the kids, I said flatly, keeping my voice monotone. Busy doing what? Sulking, my mother scoffed. Corinne told me you threw a massive tantrum because your kids weren't invited. Marin, you really need to grow up. Corinne is operating on a different level now. She is moving in elite circles. You cannot expect her to accommodate your jealousy and your lack of refinement. It was a high society event. Isla and Graham running around in their cheap clothes would have been a disaster for Preston's image. I looked at the cardboard fort outside. I pictured Isla crying on the concrete floor of the aquarium. The old Marin would have cried. The old Marin would have tried to explain, tried to defend her children, tried to beg for her mother's love. The new Marin just stared at the wall. I understand you feel that way, Mom. There was a pause on the line. My lack of emotional reaction confused her. She was used to me breaking down. Well, you should feel ashamed, she pivoted, dialing up the aggression. You didn't even send a gift. How petty can you be? Preston is about to close a $25 million deal tomorrow. Do you hear me? $25 million. They're about to secure generational wealth. And instead of being happy for your sister, you are sitting in your little suburban house, baking cupcakes and being bitter. Generational wealth. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were bragging about a deal that my husband was currently shredding into confetti. They were worshipping a man who was hours away from facing federal felony charges. I am glad things are happening for them, I said, my voice completely deadpan. Is there anything else, Mom? You are impossible, she shrieked, frustrated that her emotional manipulation was bouncing off my gray rock shield. You have always been so selfish, Marin. Corinne is out there building an empire, and you are just embarrassing. When Preston signs that contract tomorrow, they're going to buy a vacation home in Aspen. Maybe if you apologize and grovel a little, Corinne will let you come clean it for them. Think about that. I will think about it. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I set the phone face down on the counter. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from adrenaline. They were so blind, so utterly, hopelessly brainwashed by the illusion of wealth that they were willing to sacrifice their own flesh and blood on the altar of Corinne's vanity. I walked into the laundry room and pulled Callum's best suit out of the garment bag. It was a bespoke, midnight blue suit he rarely wore, preferring his comfortable flannels. But tomorrow was not a normal day. Tomorrow was an execution. I set up the ironing board and carefully pressed the shirt. With every pass of the hot iron, I smoothed out another wrinkle of my trauma. I ironed out the memory of my sold Honda Civic. I ironed out the memory of my ruined bakery opening. I ironed out the echo of Corinne calling my children blue-collar trash. I was preparing my husband's armor for war. Callum walked in as I was finishing the tie. He smelled like outside air and cardboard. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me with a soft expression. Your mom called, he guessed, noticing the rigid way I was holding my shoulders. Yeah, I nodded, carefully hanging the crisp shirt on a velvet hanger. She told me I should apologize to Corinne. She said Preston is signing a massive deal tomorrow, and if I beg, maybe they will let me clean their new vacation home in Aspen. Callum let out a dark, humorless chuckle. He walked over, took the hanger from my hands, and hung it on the door. He cupped my face in his calloused hands. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Callum said softly, his thumbs brushing over my cheekbones. Preston is going to walk into my boardroom. He is going to expect a room full of strangers ready to hand him a fortune. He is going to find me. And I promise you, Marin, by noon tomorrow, the only thing Preston will be negotiating is his bail amount. I looked into my husband's eyes and saw the absolute certainty of a predator about to strike. The trap was set. The flying monkeys had sung their final song. The fake empire was balancing on a knife's edge and Callum was holding the hilt. The weekend of humiliation was over. The era of the invisible sister was dead. Monday morning was approaching fast, bringing with it a storm of financial ruin and brutal justice that would shatter my family forever. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a ticking time bomb. I woke up before the sun, the air in the house thick with anticipation. Callum was already awake. I watched from the doorway as he stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his midnight blue bespoke suit. He looked like a completely different man from the one who built cardboard forts in flannel shirts. He looked like a corporate executioner. "Are you ready?" I asked softly, handing him a travel mug of black coffee. Callum took a sip, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. They were cold, focused, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Preston's meeting is at 10. By 10:15, his entire world will cease to exist. I will call you when the dust settles." He kissed my forehead, a brief moment of warmth, and then walked out the door. I dropped the kids off at school, kissing Isla and Graham extra hard, promising them a special dinner that night. Then I drove to my bakery. The routine of measuring flour, cracking eggs, and folding butter into dough was supposed to be grounding, but my hands were shaking too much. I kept looking at the clock on the wall. 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock. At exactly 10 o'clock, the trap snapped shut. Callum told me every single detail later that evening, painting a picture so vivid I felt like I was sitting right there in the room. The Apex Venture Capital headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a towering glass skyscraper in the financial district. The boardroom on the 45th floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city below. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. At 5 minutes to 10, Preston stepped off the private elevator. He was riding the high of a lifetime. According to the receptionist, he strutted through the glass doors wearing a tailored Italian suit that screamed new money, a heavy gold watch flashing on his wrist. In his left hand, he carried a velvet gift bag holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon champagne. He was practically vibrating with arrogance. He thought he was walking in to sign a $25 million buyout. He thought he was securing the generational wealth my mother had bragged about. The receptionist led him down the quiet, carpeted hallway and pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. "Right this way, sir. The managing partner is waiting for you," she said politely. Preston walked in, flashing a $1 million smile, ready to charm a room full of faceless corporate suits. But the room was not full. There were only 3 people waiting for him. Sitting at the far left was the chief compliance officer, a man whose entire job was hunting down financial anomalies. Sitting to the right was Zola, looking like a sleek, predatory bird behind her designer glasses, a thick file resting on the table in front of her. And sitting dead center, at the head of the table, in the seat reserved for the absolute highest authority in the building, was my husband. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. The heavy glass doors clicked shut behind him, sealing him in. His smile froze, slowly contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He blinked, probably thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. He looked at Zola, then at the compliance officer, and then back to the man he had treated like a peasant for the last decade. "Callum." Preston choked out, his voice cracking. He let out a nervous, strained laugh, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. What are you doing here, man? Did you get a job here?" "I thought I was meeting with the executive board to finalize the acquisition." Callum did not smile. He did not blink. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly on the polished wood. The silence in the room was suffocating. It stretched on for 10 seconds, then 20, pressing down on Preston like a physical weight. Have a seat, Preston, Callum finally said. His voice was low, echoing slightly in the massive room. It was not a request. It was a command. Preston's confidence began to crack. The velvet bag holding the champagne trembled in his hand. He slowly walked over to the nearest chair and sat down, looking around the room as if searching for hidden cameras. I don't understand. The email said the managing partner had the final sign-off. He does, Zola cut in, her voice slicing through the air like a razor blade. She tapped the thick file in front of her. And you are looking at him. Callum is the managing partner of Apex Venture Capital. He owns the board. He owns the fund. And he is the man you have been begging for a bailout for the last 90 days. All the color drained from Preston's face. The realization hit him like a freight train. The blue-collar nobody he had mocked, the man whose wife ran a little bakery, the man whose kids were deemed too low-class for a birthday party, was the absolute ruler of the empire he was trying to infiltrate. Oh, Preston whispered, his eyes darting wildly. Oh my God. Callum. I had no idea. We are family. This is incredible. This makes the deal even smoother, right? We can keep this all in the family. He tried to force a laugh, reaching into the velvet bag. I even brought champagne to celebrate. Put the bottle down, Callum said, his tone dropping to sub-zero. Preston froze. He slowly set the bag on the table. There is no deal, Callum stated flatly, leaning forward. There is no $25 million acquisition. There is no bailout. We brought you here today for a very different reason, Preston. Zola, walk him through the forensic audit. Preston's eyes widened in sheer terror as Zola opened the file. The trap had not just closed, the spikes were starting to close in. He was locked in a glass box in the sky, completely at the mercy of the man he had spent years humiliating. And the execution was just getting started. Zola did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the thick folder, her eyes scanning the first page before locking onto Preston with lethal precision. Let us review the reality of your agency, Preston, Zola began, her voice ringing out in the dead silent room. You presented Apex Venture Capital with financial statements claiming a 40% year-over-year growth. You submitted tax documents reflecting massive profits. However, our forensic audit team spent the weekend tearing through your digital footprint. Your agency has been completely insolvent for 8 months. You have been creating dummy shell corporations, billing them for imaginary services, and logging them as accounts receivable. That is corporate fraud. Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, catching the glare of the overhead lights. No, you are misunderstanding the data. Those are projected earnings. It is standard industry practice to forecast. Shut up, Callum interrupted softly. The sheer authority in his voice made Preston snap his mouth shut instantly. Zola flipped the page. The corporate fraud is bad enough to kill the deal, she continued smoothly. But it is what you did 3 months ago to keep your personal lifestyle afloat that brings us to the criminal portion of this meeting. Preston's hands started shaking uncontrollably. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. You secured 3 separate margin loans from 3 boutique banks, Zola read, tracing the lines with her manicured finger. Totaling exactly $3 million. You used these funds to pay the mortgage on your estate, lease luxury vehicles, and, most recently, throw a $50,000 Parisian-themed party for your daughter. But banks do not lend $3 million to a dying company with zero liquidity. They require a guarantor with massive, verified assets. Zola slid a scanned document across the massive table. It stopped right in front of Preston. Preston looked down at the paper. It was the loan agreement. The color completely vanished from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death certificate. Is that your signature at the bottom, Callum? Zola asked formally for the record. It is not, Callum replied, his eyes burning holes through Preston. It is a clumsy forgery. Preston used my name, my title as managing partner, and the reputation of this firm to illegally secure $3 million. He committed federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. Callum, please, Preston whimpered. The arrogant, flashy agency owner was gone. He was practically shrinking in his chair, his voice cracking into a high-pitched plea. You have to understand. Corinne was driving me crazy. She demands this lifestyle. She wanted the mansion, she wanted the cars, she needed that ridiculous party to impress those snobs. She threatened to leave me if we lost our status. I was desperate. I just needed a bridge loan until the buyout went through. I was going to pay it back, I swear to God. He was throwing his own wife under the bus. He was willing to sacrifice the golden child to save his own skin. It was pathetic. You stole my name, Callum said, his voice deadly calm. You stole my name to fund a lifestyle you used to humiliate my wife. You stole millions of dollars to throw a party, and then your wife called my children blue-collar trash. She said my daughter, a 7-year-old girl, would taint her image. Callum stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, towering over Preston. You called my family low-class, Callum said, looking down at the broken man. I call you a felon. The acquisition is dead. The deal is officially cancelled. Preston buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic sob. Callum, please. I am begging you. If the banks find out, they will foreclose on everything. We will lose the house. We will be bankrupt. Just give me time to fix this. We are family. We were never family, Callum corrected coldly. And you do not have to worry about the banks finding out. They already know. Preston's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. What? At 8 o'clock this morning, Zola announced cheerfully, closing her file, our legal department filed a comprehensive fraud alert with all 3 banks. They have already frozen every single one of your personal and business accounts. Your credit cards are currently declining. We also submitted a full evidence packet to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the local authorities. Right on cue, as if choreographed by a movie director, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. 2 uniformed police officers, accompanied by a man in a plain suit holding a badge, stepped into the room. Preston let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. He scrambled backward in his chair, pressing himself against the glass window as if he could phase through it and plummet to the street below. Preston Vance, the plainclothes detective asked, stepping forward with a pair of steel handcuffs in his hand. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding multiple counts of bank fraud and identity theft. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Callum, stop them. Do not do this to Corinne. Do not do this to Fallon. Preston screamed, thrashing wildly as the uniformed officers grabbed his arms and yanked him to his feet. Callum did not flinch. He watched with a stone-cold expression as the cold metal cuffs clicked securely around Preston's wrists. The loud, sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. You did this to yourself, Callum said quietly as the officers began dragging Preston toward the door. Enjoy your new aesthetic. Preston was sobbing uncontrollably as they marched him out of the boardroom, down the plush-carpeted hallway, and into the elevator. The flashy CEO, the man who cared only about image and status, was doing a perp walk in front of dozens of my husband's employees. The glass doors clicked shut again. The room fell silent. Callum looked down at the table. The velvet bag was still sitting there. He reached inside and pulled out the bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. He handed it to Zola. Take this home, Zola, Callum said, finally cracking a small, tired smile. You earned it today. The execution was flawless. The corporate monster had been slain. But as Callum texted me that the police had taken Preston away, I knew the real war was just beginning. Because while Preston was sitting in the back of a squad car in handcuffs, Corinne was sitting in her massive mansion, completely unaware that her entire fake universe had just been wiped off the map. When the shockwave finally hit her, the explosion was going to be biblical. I was standing at the front counter of the bakery, carefully boxing up a dozen lemon raspberry cupcakes, when my phone started vibrating violently against the glass display case. I glanced at the screen. It was Corinne. I calmly handed the white box to my customer, thanked them with a smile, and waited for the bell above the door to chime as they left. The bakery was empty. The air smelled of sugar and butter. It was my sanctuary. I wiped my hands on my apron, picked up the buzzing phone, and hit accept. I didn't even get to say hello. Marin, what the hell is happening? Curran's voice tore through the speaker, so loud and shrill I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She was not just crying, she was hyperventilating, screaming like a banshee. My cards are declining. All of them. I tried to pay the caterer for the party cleanup, and they told me the accounts are frozen. And Preston is not answering his phone. Where is he? What did your freak husband do to my husband? I leaned against the counter, tracing the wood grain with my fingernail. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. For 34 years, her screams used to make me panic. They used to make me apologize and scramble to fix her problems. Not anymore. My husband didn't do anything to your husband, Corinne, I said, my voice steady, cool, and detached. Your husband committed federal fraud. He forged Callum's signature to steal $3 million to pay for your ridiculous Parisian party. Callum simply reported a criminal to the police. There was a sudden, breathless silence on the other end. I could hear her gasping for air. Police? Corinne choked out, the word barely a whisper. What do you mean, police? I mean he was arrested in Callum's boardroom an hour ago, I replied flatly. He is in federal custody right now, Corinne. The banks are taking everything back. The house, the cars, the money. It is all gone. No, you are lying. You are just jealous. Corinne shrieked, the denial kicking in with aggressive force. Preston was selling his agency for $25 million. He is a genius. You are making this up because your kids are blue-collar trash and you hate that we are successful. I let her scream. I let her hurl insults and curses until her voice went hoarse. And when she finally stopped to take a breath, I delivered the final blow. The only trash here is the fake life you built with stolen money, I said quietly, cutting through her hysteria like a surgical blade. You threw my children away to protect an image that did not even exist. You wanted to curate a high society aesthetic? Well, get ready for your new aesthetic, Corinne. Orange jumpsuits and bankruptcy court. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up. I didn't just block her number. I deleted her contact entirely. I exhaled a long breath, staring at the ceiling. It felt like a massive iron chain had just snapped off my chest. But the silence only lasted for 10 minutes. The phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. I knew this was coming. The flying monkey was swooping in for the rescue mission. I answered it, putting it on speaker so I could start wiping down the espresso machine. Marin, tell me this is a sick joke, my mother sobbed. She was not angry this time. She sounded completely terrified. Corinne just called me from a panic attack. She said Preston was arrested? She said Callum had him arrested? Tell Callum to drop the charges right now. Tell him it is a family misunderstanding. You cannot drop federal bank fraud charges, Mom, I said, spraying the counter with cleaner. He stole $3 million. It is out of our hands. The SEC and the FBI are handling it now. My mother let out a wail that made my blood run cold. No, Marin, you do not understand. You have to fix this. Your father and I, oh my God, what are we going to do? I stopped wiping the counter. The sheer panic in her voice was not just out of sympathy for Corinne. It was personal fear. What did you do, Mom? I asked, my voice hardening. Preston came to us 2 months ago, she cried, her words tumbling out in a hysterical rush. He said he was closing a massive deal. A guaranteed $25 million buyout. He said if we invested our retirement fund as bridge capital, he would triple it. We took out a second mortgage on the house, Marin. We gave him $300,000. Every penny we had saved. If he goes to prison, if the company is bankrupt, we lose the house. We have nothing. I stood frozen in the middle of the bakery. The absolute irony of the situation was sickening. They had called me a failure. They had mocked Callum. They had worshipped the golden child and her flashy husband so much that they blindly handed over their entire life savings to a con artist. They had financed their own destruction just to be closer to the illusion of elite wealth. You mortgaged your home for a man who leased a Porsche? I asked, the disbelief evident in my tone. He promised us, she screamed, the desperation turning into vicious anger. And Callum ruined it. Callum could have just bought the company and kept it quiet. He has the money. You have to make Callum pay off Preston's debt. We are your parents, Marin. You owe us. I closed my eyes. They had sacrificed my college car. They had ruined my bakery opening. They had excused the emotional abuse of my children. And now, they wanted my husband to pay $3 million to save them from their own staggering greed and stupidity. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. You chose the golden child. You invested in the golden child. Now, you get to sit in the ruins with her. Do not ask my husband to pay for the mistakes you made by worshipping a criminal. Have a nice life, Mom. I hung up the phone. I went into the settings and blocked my mother's number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had ever looked down on us at a family gathering. I set the phone down and looked around my bakery. The afternoon sun was streaming through the front windows, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of fresh vanilla was overpowering. For the first time in 34 years, the noise was gone. The criticism, the comparisons, the toxic demands, all of it vanished into the ether. I was completely and utterly free. The empire of lies had collapsed, and I was standing safely on the outside, watching the dust settle. 3 months later, the autumn air in the city turned crisp and sharp, stripping the leaves from the trees just as mercilessly as the federal government had stripped Preston of his fake empire. The collapse of the Golden Child was not a quiet, private affair. It was a spectacular, very public implosion that played out in the local news and the gossip circles of the city's elite. Callum and I watched the fallout from the absolute safety of our quiet suburban life, completely insulated from the blast zone by the steel boundaries we had erected. Preston's downfall was absolute. Because he had committed fraud against federally insured banks and forged the signature of a high-profile venture capitalist, the judge denied him bail. He went straight from his custom-tailored Italian suits to a standard-issue orange jumpsuit in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial. The $25 million buyout was obviously dead, and without it, his agency folded within 2 weeks. The doors were padlocked, the employees were let go, and the servers were seized as evidence. But it was the social and financial ruin of Corinne that truly demonstrated the irony of her arrogance. The banks moved with ruthless efficiency. Since the $3 million loan was fraudulent, they immediately seized all assets tied to Preston and Corinne. The leased Porsche and the luxury SUV were towed out of their driveway in the middle of the night. Their bank accounts were frozen and drained to satisfy creditors. And then came the mansion. The beautiful, sprawling estate where Corinne had hosted her $50,000 Parisian gala was put up for foreclosure auction. The most poetic justice of all? The mansion was purchased at a massive discount by a real estate holding company owned by the father of the very same mayor's daughter Corinne had been so desperate to network with at the party. The elite circle she had sacrificed her own family to impress did not just turn their backs on her, they stepped right over her to buy her repossessed house for a bargain. Corinne's Instagram, once a daily shrine to her hashtags of high society and elite networking, went completely dark. The VIP parents she had meticulously curated her guest list for stopped returning her calls. When you build your entire identity on the illusion of wealth, the moment the money vanishes, you become invisible to the people who only love the illusion. She had to pull Fallon out of the prestigious private school immediately. The $30,000 yearly tuition was impossible to pay when her credit cards were bouncing at the grocery store. Fallon was enrolled in the local public school, ironically, the exact same public school Isla and Graham attended. As for my parents, the reality of their blind favoritism hit them like a wrecking ball. The $300,000 they had sunk into Preston's dying company was gone forever, swallowed up in the bankruptcy proceedings. To save their home from foreclosure, my father had to come out of retirement and take a job as a greeter at a hardware store, while my mother started working the cash register at a local pharmacy. They tried to reach out to me a few times through new numbers, leaving voicemails begging for a small loan from Callum to help them get back on their feet. I deleted the messages without listening to the end. My empathy for them had burned out completely. You do not get to fund the weapon used against my children and then ask me for bandages when it blows up in your face. Life in our house, meanwhile, moved on with a beautiful, chaotic rhythm. My bakery was thriving. Callum closed a massive legitimate deal that he celebrated by buying the kids a ridiculous, giant inflatable water slide for the backyard. Isla had completely forgotten the trauma of the aquarium, her confidence restored by the unwavering protection of her father. Graham was still obsessed with dinosaurs. We were happy. I thought the ghosts of my past were permanently exorcised. I assumed Corinne was too proud, too ashamed, to ever show her face near my blue-collar neighborhood again. I was wrong. It was a late Saturday afternoon in October. We were hosting a backyard barbecue for a few of Callum's friends and some neighbors. It was the exact opposite of a curated networking gala. We had cheap red plastic cups, paper plates, and hot dogs charring on a smoky grill. Kids were running around with water guns, screaming and slipping on the wet grass. Country music was blaring from a portable speaker. It was loud, messy, and absolutely perfect. I was standing by the cooler, grabbing a juice box for Graham, when the music seemed to fade into the background. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel at the edge of our driveway. I looked up. An old, beat-up gray sedan pulled to a stop near the curb. The paint was peeling on the hood, and one of the hubcaps was missing. It was the kind of car Corinne would have previously demanded be towed if it parked too close to her driveway. The driver's door opened, and Corinne stepped out. I froze, the juice box cold in my hand. I hadn't seen her in 3 months. The transformation was shocking. Her hair, usually perfectly blown out, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a faded, plain gray t-shirt and loose jeans. No designer labels. No heavy makeup. The arrogant, untouchable posture of the golden child was completely gone. She looked exhausted. She looked defeated. She looked remarkably normal. The passenger door opened, and 10-year-old Fallon stepped out. She was wearing simple leggings and a sweater, clutching a small, brightly wrapped present in her hands. She looked nervous, hiding slightly behind her mother. Corinne stood at the edge of my driveway, looking past the wooden fence into my chaotic, joyful backyard. She saw the paper plates. She saw Callum laughing with a neighbor while flipping burgers in his flannel shirt. She saw my children playing freely without a care in the world about aesthetics or status. Our eyes locked across the lawn. The silence stretched between us, thick with the ghosts of 34 years of resentment, betrayal, and absolute ruin. I held my ground, waiting to see what the fallen queen of high society was going to do now that she was standing at the gates of the blue-collar sister she had tried to destroy. I slowly put the juice box down on the picnic table and wiped my hands on my apron. Callum noticed the shift in my posture. He followed my gaze to the driveway, his expression instantly hardening. He set the grilling tongs down and took a step toward me, ready to intervene, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was my battle. The forensic audit was his victory, but this was mine. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my sneakers. Corinne didn't move. She just stood by the rusted door of her beat-up sedan, her hands nervously twisting the hem of her cheap t-shirt. Fallon peeked out from behind her, holding the small gift tight against her chest. "You are trespassing, Corinne," I said, stopping 10 feet away from her. My voice was calm, void of any anger but lacking any warmth. Corinne flinched as if I had struck her. Her eyes, stripped of their usual heavy mascara, were red and rimmed with dark circles. "Marin," she started, her voice cracking instantly. She swallowed hard, looking down at her scuffed shoes before forcing herself to meet my gaze again. I drove past 3 times. I didn't know if I should stop. But I saw the kids playing and Fallon. She placed a trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. Fallon looked up at me, her eyes wide and timid. "We heard it was Isla's 8th birthday this weekend," Corinne whispered. Fallon picked out a present for her. From the dollar section at the discount store. It is all we could afford, but she really wanted to bring it. I looked at the small, crinkled wrapping paper. The irony was suffocating. 3 months ago, this woman banned my children from a $50,000 gala because they weren't wearing couture. Now, she was standing in my driveway holding a dollar store toy, begging for a moment of grace. "Why are you here, Corinne?" I asked flatly. "Your husband is in federal prison. Mom and Dad are working retail to save their house because they funded your fake life. You called my children trash. So why on earth would you come to my home?" A tear spilled over Corinne's eyelashes, tracing a clean path down her cheek. "Because I have nothing left, Marin. Nothing." She let out a shaky breath, the dam finally breaking. The arrogant golden child shattered right in front of me, leaving behind a terrified, broken woman. The people I thought were my friends, the ones I threw you away to impress? They blocked my number the day Preston was arrested. Corinne sobbed quietly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The PTA moms at the private school literally crossed the street to avoid me when I went to collect Fallon's things. I lost the house. I lost the cars. I am renting a tiny apartment over a laundromat, and I am working the night shift at a diner just to pay for groceries. I didn't say anything. I just let her speak. "I spent my entire life trying to look down on you," she cried, her shoulders shaking. "Mom and Dad taught me that if I was beautiful and rich, I was better. I built my whole identity on an illusion. And Preston. Preston fed that illusion with stolen money. When the money vanished, I realized the only real thing in my life was the family I had spent 34 years treating like garbage." She looked past me, toward the backyard. The sound of Callum laughing with Isla carried over the fence. "You have everything, Marin," Corinne whispered, the absolute devastation clear in her voice. "You have a husband who protects you. You have children who smile. You have a real life. I was so incredibly jealous of your peace that I tried to destroy it. I was a monster. I am so sorry for what I said to Isla. I am sorry for all of it." She covered her face with her hands, weeping openly in my driveway. 10 years ago, the sight of my sister crying would have sent me into a panic. I would have rushed forward, hugged her, and offered her whatever she needed to feel better. I would have set myself on fire to keep her warm. But the gray rock I had built around my heart held firm. I felt a pang of pity, yes, but the overwhelming guilt was gone. I looked at Fallon. The 10-year-old girl was watching her mother cry, looking terrified and confused. Fallon had lost her school, her friends, her home, and her father in the span of 3 months. She was a victim of her parents' toxic greed. And right now, she was just a kid standing on a driveway, holding a cheap present, wanting to play with her cousin. Kids do not inherit the sins of their parents unless we force them to. "Fallon," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. The little girl looked up, her eyes watery. "Isla is in the backyard by the water slide," I said, pointing toward the wooden gate. "Why don't you go give her that present? There are hot dogs on the table if you are hungry." Fallon's face lit up with a hesitant, hopeful smile. She looked up at Corinne, who nodded through her tears. Fallon sprinted past me, pushing open the wooden gate and disappearing into the loud, chaotic joy of the blue-collar barbecue. I turned my attention back to Corinne. She wiped her face, looking at me with a desperate, pathetic kind of hope. She thought letting Fallon in meant the bridge was rebuilt. She thought the apology had erased the past. "Thank you, Marin," Corinne breathed, taking a tentative step forward. "Thank you. I promise I will make it up to you. I will pay you back for everything. We can start over." "Stop right there," I commanded, raising my hand. The absolute authority in my voice made her freeze instantly. I closed the distance between us, stepping into her personal space so she could hear exactly what I was about to say over the country music playing in the background. "Do not mistake my kindness to your daughter as forgiveness for you, Corinne," I said, my words dropping like anvils. "Fallon is an innocent child. I will not punish her for having you and Preston as parents. But you and I? We are not starting over. We are not going back to the way things were." Corinne's breath hitched, her eyes widening in fear. "I am not the peacekeeper anymore," I continued, staring directly into her soul. "I do not bend. I do not accommodate. You are standing in my driveway because you hit rock bottom, not because you suddenly discovered morality. You are sorry because you got caught and lost everything." "That is not true," she pleaded, but I cut her off. "It doesn't matter if it is true or not," I stated coldly. "What matters is the boundary. I will allow you to exist on the absolute fringes of my life, strictly for the sake of the children. You can drop Fallon off for birthdays. You can wave at holidays. But you do not get my emotional support. You do not get Callum's money. You do not get my mothering. You are on a lifetime probation. I reached out and poked her hard in the center of her chest. And if you ever, for the rest of your miserable life, say a single toxic word to my children, if you ever make them feel less than perfect, I will personally ensure you never see the inside of this neighborhood again. Do we understand each other? Corinne stared at me, trembling. She was looking at a ghost. The Marin she knew, the quiet, accommodating sister who took the smaller bedroom, the canceled graduation party, the endless insults, was dead. In her place stood a woman, forged in the fire of a mother's protective rage. I understand, Corinne whispered, her voice breaking. She nodded slowly, retreating a step back toward her rusted car. I understand the boundaries, Marin. I will not cross them. I just want Fallon to know what a real family feels like. Then she can learn it here, I said evenly. But you need to earn your place at the table. I turned my back on her and walked toward the wooden gate. I didn't invite her in. I didn't offer her a hug. I opened the gate, stepped into my chaotic backyard, and pulled it shut behind me, leaving the golden child standing alone on the driveway. When I walked back to the patio, Callum was waiting. He handed me a red plastic cup filled with cold lemonade. He didn't ask what was said. He had watched the entire exchange from afar, reading my body language. Is she gone? He asked softly. She is sitting in her car, I replied, taking a sip of the tart drink. I nodded toward the inflatable water slide. Fallon was soaking wet, laughing hysterically as Isla sprayed her with a neon green water gun. The heavy burden of the past 3 months seemed to wash right off the little girl. Fallon can stay for the afternoon. Corinne knows the rules. Callum wrapped his strong, flannel-clad arm around my waist, pulling me tight against his side. You handled that like a CEO, he murmured, kissing my temple. I learned from the best corporate executioner in the business, I smiled, leaning into his warmth. We stood there watching our children play, surrounded by friends who loved us for exactly who we were. There were no venture capitalists to impress. There was no Parisian aesthetic to maintain. There was just the smell of charcoal, the sound of laughter, and the profound, unbreakable peace that comes from setting an absolute boundary. My parents eventually adjusted to their new reality. They never got their house back, but the retail jobs humbled them. We exchanged polite, shallow texts on holidays, but they know better than to ask Callum for financial help ever again. The dynamic of power had permanently shifted. The enablers were stripped of their leverage, and the scapegoat was now the fortress. Preston was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for his various financial crimes. Corinne officially filed for divorce shortly after his sentencing. She still works the night shift at the diner. She drops Fallon off at our house every other weekend. She never steps foot inside. She hands over a small overnight bag, says a polite, quiet thank you, and leaves. Sometimes, I watch her drive away in that beat-up sedan, and I feel a fleeting moment of sadness for the sister I never really had. But then I look at my daughter, confident, happy, and entirely unbroken, and the sadness evaporates. I learned the hardest lesson of my life that year. Family is not defined by blood, it is defined by respect. Toxic people will use the word family as a leash to drag you through their own dirt. But the moment you drop the leash, the moment you realize you do not owe them your sanity or your children's self-esteem, their power completely vanishes. Corinne thought my children were too blue-collar for her world. In the end, her world was nothing but a fragile house of cards, and all it took was one quiet, blue-collar husband to blow it to dust. That night, after the barbecue was over and the backyard was finally quiet, I sat on the porch swing with Callum. The stars were bright, piercing through the crisp autumn sky. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. You know, I said quietly, watching a lone firefly blink in the darkness. Sometimes I wonder. Wonder what? Callum asked, his fingers gently tracing circles on my arm. If we went too far, I admitted, speaking the thought out loud for the first time. I look at Fallon, having to change schools, losing her dad to prison. I look at my parents, working the cash register in their 60s. Callum, you legally obliterated Preston. You didn't just decline the contract, you actively handed him over to the SEC and the FBI. You triggered an avalanche that wiped out my entire extended family's financial stability. I know they deserved consequences, but sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wonder if a simple no would have been enough. Did we cross the line from justice into vengeance? Callum stopped tracing circles on my arm. He looked out into the yard, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He forged my signature, Marin. He committed a felony, Callum said, his voice practical and firm. But even if he hadn't, they attacked our children. There is no line when it comes to protecting Isla and Graham. I would do it again, exactly the same way, 1,000 times over. I nodded slowly, the guilt fading as quickly as it had arrived. He was right. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of strict, enforced boundaries. But it still makes me think about the nature of retaliation and family loyalty. When toxic relatives push you into a corner, is it wrong to use a nuclear option to fight your way out? So, I turn the question to you, the jury of the internet. Was I too ruthless? Was Callum's financial execution of Preston justified because of the fraud, or was it a step too far that unfairly punished my niece and my parents? Should I have offered Corinne more financial help when she showed up broken at my door, or was the strict boundary the only way to protect my family? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a permanent line with a toxic golden child? Tell me your stories. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching today's story. If you enjoyed this satisfying dose of family karma, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the most intense Reddit dramas. See you in the next video.